and in today's video we're doing a first. I've actually put some thought into how this looks, so it is going to be how things are going this season. We're going to give it a go right from the off. It won't be easy, but we'll give it a try, as a famous Andy Murray once said. Yes, we're back for a new season of content here on FPL Yellow Army for the 2023-24 season. Yeah, we're going to give it a little go, certainly at the start of the season with graphics, and it would be great to get as many people on board for this season. So if you like FPL, if you are a bit of a, FPL addicts, then do be sure to smash a like on the video, share with your mates, spread the word. I am FPL Yellow Army. You can find me on Twitter at RobertoHollis9 and also on Instagram at Roberto_the_pro, all non-caps. And of course, on here, FPL Yellow Army, it's our 6th season of FPL that we've been playing. As you can see, my rank history is as follows. We've had 2 very decent seasons the last few years. Top 20k last season, top 150k the season before that, and top 300k the season before that. And it's just been progression for me, and I've been really happy with it, really, because those first 2 seasons didn't really play the game properly, took a lot of hits, but that was the intro as well. If you liked that, the little celebration, the Alvarez. So yeah, do be sure to join me on the journey this season. It's going to be a really good one. And it's going to be interesting to see how we do in this season, because last season it felt like a lot of my mistakes came earlier on in the season. I remember captaining Mo Salah in that game week against Everton when Haaland had Villa away, and the pain when Haaland scored, just things like that. And I've learned from that since. And after that real mistake, I just always captained Haaland, and it really helped me with my rank. And it got to the point of, squeaky bum time. That late stage in the season, I thought I was going to really bottle it, because there was a couple game weeks that went badly around game week 35, 36, especially 36, where a certain Brighton defender was on my bench. Yes, painfully enough, everyone else zapped up the 17-pointer at the Emirates, and I didn't. Because he was first on bench, and I had Rashford on my bench because I knew he was out injured. It was just an absolute nightmare. But it's a new season, and as I say, we did really well in the end to claw it into the top 20k, because we were looking around 33. Then we had an amazing game week 37, and that really did help us. And then game week 38 as well. What a couple of decisions. Harry Kane captain on the final day, 32 points. Thank you very much, Harry. Will he be in my FPL team next season? That is the question, with rumours of him making the move to Bayern Munich. But also, Harvey Barnes, one last hurrah for Leicester City, or so I thought, because now he's on his way to Tyneside for Newcastle United. So, he's a player that did well for me on that final game against West Ham. I wonder if he will be scoring more goals against West Ham in black and white next season. So let's get into this video, and today basically it's an introduction to the new campaign. So do smash a like on it. As I say, subscribe for more content, and make sure you hit that bell so you don't miss a single video that I'll be doing in this fresh season. I'll be having uploads coming very, very soon. It will be a nice juicy one tomorrow, with me looking at my first kind of proper draft for the new season, and then the next one I'll be rating some of your drafts that you sent in on Twitter, so thank you for that. But yeah, let's get into it. So ultimately, the game is launched. FPL is new. As I mentioned before, it was a very nice way to end the season for me. That was the team I had on game week 38. Not bad. I mean, it wasn't amazing, let's be honest. But it was good enough. I was happy with it. And David De Gea with that pen save will go down in history. But of course, he has now moved on. And a new goalkeeper for Manchester United has moved in. That is, of course, Andre Onana, the ex-Inter Milan goalkeeper, who plays out well with his feet and, has come into the game at 5 million. So he will be an interesting point of discussion for many people. Estupiñán, as you can see there, was in my team. And then we had, of course, Riyad Mahrez towards the end of that season. He did well for me, to be honest, in many seasons. I had big ups with him and big downs. I remember that that game week 27 blank, I think it was, not last season, the season before. And I had him on my free hit, and he got benched against Everton away and then came on for a one-pointer. It was just never nice to see. But look, Mahrez, an amazing FPL asset, especially in his time at Leicester, and he will sorely be missed. But it just wasn't played enough by Pep Guardiola. You know, the Pep Roulette, that's what things go like around here. So we just had to accept it. Alvarez was another player who didn't get as many minutes probably as he deserved last season, but he was fantastic when he did. But with Erling Haaland now perma-captain, it'll be hard to squeeze him in, that is for sure. So, yeah, just 17 points off the top 10k last season, as you can see right here. So, it was looking unlikely, really, for a few weeks before the end of the season that I would get that coveted top 10k. But after, a bit of a rocky start, and then around the World Cup, I kind of had a few struggles. And then that triple captain Marcus Rashford really saved me around game week 22. And then I started to get much, much better. By the way, if you did miss it, then be sure to check out my FPL season review that I did with FPL apprentices. And that was really great to catch up with Chris and talk to him about that. Chris and Tom, they're really good on the FPL apprentices, and it was great to talk to Tom. He talked about his season and Chris's season because they have a joint FPL team. So if you did miss that, then I did go into my last season a little bit more. Also, if you want to look back on my previous FPL campaigns, I have got a playlist on the channel of each of my seasons that I've been uploading on YouTube. So last season, there's a playlist called FPL 2022-23. The same goes for 21-22 and part 2 of 20 to 21, because I did post some content on my old channel, but that was back when I used that channel. That one's gone now. So ultimately, yeah, those are some history to look back on if you're interested. But this is the start of a brand new season, so we're going straight into it. And before I do give my gut draft away, which I don't want to do really, because that's another video, let's look into FPL and how it's been priced this season. So what I'm going to do for you people is I'm just going to go to the site and basically, yeah, just look at the prices, how they've come in as. It's a nice, fresh-looking site this year. I've got to say, I do like the look of it. I think last year we were so used to the previous format that I didn't really like the update with the green and purple, but I've got to say, it's grown on me, and now that it's the same as it was and it's back this year, I do quite like the look of it. But let's not look at my team. Let's have a look at the prices. Here we go. So the prices are as follows for this upcoming FPL campaign, and really there are some big moments here. So let's talk with the main one, which is Erling Haaland. Now, Erling Haaland coming in at 14 million. Of course, I think that is warranted. An amazing first FPL season, 272 points. I've got some people on my Twitter timeline saying 14 million, like, it's just not fair. I shouldn't have to pay this much. Look, Erling Haaland, it's his debut season. We thought he would take a time. Some people thought, I didn't, but that he would take time to adjust. I had him from the very first game week, and 13 points, I predicted 13 points he delivered against West Ham. And what a season. Just unbelievable in terms of the amount of chances he wasted, and yet he still scored 36 goals. Like, when you think about that Man City team creating chances just for him, he had a few games where you thought, how has he not scored with how good his goal record was? But yeah, what a player, what a debut season. And he's just perma-captain now. It's as simple as that. He's just so highly owned, and for the right reasons. 85.9% selected by at the start of this season. I remember Jesus last season being around the 79-80 mark before game week 1. And everyone was like, this is unheard of. We've never seen a striker or even a player own this much before game week 1. And off the back of 36 goals, you can understand why. But it is just absolutely, in my opinion, FPL, murder if you decide to go without him. And, I'm not saying that there's necessarily always a way you should play FPL, but I'll say 99% of that I'm agreeing with, that the way to play right now is have Erling Haaland, because you will just fall behind. Everyone else owns him, so it's just not worth the stress and the pain, basically. But if you can make an amazing, amazing team without Erling Haaland, it's not essential. Of course, it's very much close to essential, But it's not like you're cheating the system or you should be dismissed with an Erling Haaland-less draft. It's just it wouldn't be me. Okay. So Harry Kane, what a season. Let's not forget that he was just 9 points off Erling Haaland, and ultimately, right, Haaland came in cheaper than Kane at the start of the season, and everyone was like, sorry, I'm going for Haaland. Some people went for Kane in that first game. Southampton at home didn't score, and everyone was like, what is going on? Harry Kane. But what a season he had. And he was probably my player of FPL last season in terms of loyalty to him. Whenever I had him, he was so good for me. And whenever I took him out, it was just pain. But it was more a thing of I was trying to play the double game weeks. I had brought in Isak a few game weeks before their double in 36. And I think they might have had a double in 34, possibly. But yeah, no, I think it was mainly just looking at, those fixtures, and Kane was just so good for me. And I remember when he was quite lowly owned, like halfway through the season, and Haaland was still highly owned. I think it was the Palace game in like game week 15, 14. He pangs a couple goals at Selhurst Park, and he was like under 20% owned. And that's about as little differential as he became, because after that everyone started to pile on. And now of course he's differential because we just don't know what his future will hold, with rumours of Bayern Munich, and ultimately I think there's a good chance Kane does stay. It's just about now what Daniel Levy does, what Tottenham do, and if they can get money and they can cash in, then I don't think it would be unwise, because why keep a player that doesn't want to stay if that's what he will say? If he wants to stay, then get the contract signed, easy. But it's not easy when you've got a player like Harry Kane who has not won trophies and wants ultimately to do that with another club. Now, I don't think Spurs would sell to another team in the Premier League like a Manchester United, as much as that move makes sense. I just don't think Levy would be that foolish, really. I think Bayern Munich is plausible, and I don't think many clubs can afford Harry Kane, but Bayern Munich probably one of those teams that can. So I just think if he's still in the game, that will make other Tottenham players easier to own. But would I own him from the start of this season? I don't know, because Erling Haaland's definitely there, so it's quite hard to fit in these premiums, and we'll get onto that when it comes to pricing, because at 12.5 I think Kane is much cheaper than Haaland, and he's the same price as Mo Salah. So there's a decision to make there, because if Haaland, for whatever reason, goes on a goal drought, and I don't ever think that will be the case, but let's just say it did, or he got an injury for a long period, because let's not forget that at Dortmund, Haaland was a few injuries, that was his record, and Harry Kane, he was really good last season, but Haaland barely had many injuries, or at least long-term ones, so Kane could be a bit of a template breaker if that was the case, but I just don't see it happening until we know that for a fact. And Mo Salah at the same price as Kane. Now, you can say ultimately that Salah's the better option there, because you get extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet if Liverpool keep a clean sheet. And ultimately, right, Salah, yes, he is a bit less of an option than he was in previous seasons, but he's still the FPL GOAT. He's still the king of FPL in the last 6-7 seasons, because he has been the number one go-to, consistent, above 120 points, above 150 points, and his first season, 32 goals. I mean, I know Erling Haaland's outscored that last season, but for a midfielder as well, you factor in the fact that Salah's done it for longer than Erling Haaland, because of course Haaland could, but Salah's definitely had that FPL history behind him. So I think Salah this season will be interesting, though. It will be splitting the crowd, because if we want Haaland, like we say he's essential, which he's becoming the new Salah in terms of that essential value, then where do you fit in Salah as well when you factor in the fact that Haaland, as a perma-captain, doesn't have the same added value it did in previous seasons, right? Because, yes, Harry Kane was good last season, but was he producing those massive hauls consistently? I talked about that Crystal Palace one, the 15, 16-pointer, but that was a rare thing last season for Kane. As good as he was, I'm not, doubting that. It's just, when you captain someone, you want those 15-pointers, those 20-pointers, like Erling Haaland got quite a few times with those hat-tricks. And Salah's done it in the past with those hat-tricks. So that does sway a little bit me towards Salah over Kane. But Salah and Haaland, we will have to see. Ødegaard. Now, Ødegaard last season had a fantastic season, it's got to be said. I think 8.5 for him is a a very fair price. We thought all of these Arsenal players were massively underpriced, but we didn't expect them to go on that amazing season and be pushing for the title. We thought they might go for the top four, but really that was a real surprise. So they've done well there, in my opinion. Rashford at 9, I think he was a little bit underpriced, in my opinion. I thought he was going to be 9.5 when he came in. And Bruno Fernandes at 8.5 is another thing to talk about. But Rashford, for just 0.5 more than Bruno, I think when we saw that Bruno price, we thought, yeah, 8.5, that is very, very tempting. And a lot of people will have Fernandes for that reason. And some people will have Rashford. But ultimately, I don't think there's a wrong answer here. Because you look at both of them, Fernandes in that first season was unbelievable. The second season was fairly good. The third season, not great, I've got to be honest. 21-22, he had that hat-trick at home to Leeds on the opening day, but then didn't really do much. Then last season, it wasn't one of his best seasons, but creatively, his stats, he really did outperform his stats in terms of his chance creation, and ultimately his XG was through the roof, his expected assists especially, right? So Fernandes felt like he was unlucky to not get as many points as he did. Ultimately, he is on penalties as well, and I think he's in for a big season with that price point. But with Rashford, he is very good. He is more of a talisman, and it will be interesting to see, who goes for the double up, because it's not out of the question if you can try and get both, but it's just whether or not you want to go full steam ahead with the fixtures coming up for Manchester United. But I think Rashford at 9 is a little bit underpriced, but it's still fair when the fact he was 6.5. He had to have that increase. He was a great value pick last season. Now, Saka, 8.5. For me, that's criminal. I think he had to be at least 9. The fact he's less than that, I just can't believe it. Like, I was genuinely flabbergasted to see that price. And now seeing Ødegaard at the same price. Yes, Ødegaard had the best Arsenal FPL season of all the midfielders. And yes, it was a massive step up in terms of his goal output and his assist output from previous FPL campaigns, but you're still picking Saka because his penalty duty and the fact that he's, for me, playing in a bit more of an attacking position than Ødegaard. And then especially with the arrival of Kai Havertz now, I think that looks like, we don't know, but there's possible a chance that, Ødegaard drops a bit deeper to accommodate Havertz pushing up a bit more. We just not quite sure how that's going to work, with Rice obviously protecting the back four that now that he's signed from West Ham. So I think ultimately Ødegaard is one to ponder, but I'm not sure many will look at him at 8.5 really. And then we've got Martinelli. He's a bit cheaper than Saka, so you think about the 0.5 you're saving there. But as I mentioned with Saka, that price is criminal really. So I just think when Saka's going to play 90 minutes week in, week out, and he's on penalties, it's an interesting one. 8 million's a nice price for Martinelli. Ultimately, though, I don't mind it. Obviously, he was an amazing 6 million last season, and that value is not quite there now. But we have to see what Arteta does with Trossard in terms of the minutes he gets, because if he is still coming off early, Martinelli, then it does lessen his appeal. But let's not forget that Martinelli, in terms of goals in his form, was probably up there with the most consistent all season, because we've got to factor in that Martinelli got injured at the end of last season, and that was a massive blow for them, obviously, the Arsenal. So I do think that Martinelli, he got injured, I think, that Brighton game, the last couple of few games, so he didn't get those chances of goals at Wolves, and for instance. So yeah, Martinelli is a very tempting one. It's just whether or not you want to make that gamble. Trippier, 6.5, I think it's fair. A lot of people now will not see Trippier as an option with that price. And a lot of people who play the game casually will just auto-pick this guy because, yes, he was fantastic last season, but, things change. As good as he was in terms of his set-piece duty, that price, when you think you can get other players for a bit cheaper that we'll go on to talk about in the defensive department, he's just a bit too expensive, to have, especially from the start when you look at Newcastle's fixtures. Aston Villa is not the easiest fixture, and then you've got Liverpool and Man City in the opening 3, so it's really quite a grim reading. But let's not rule out this guy later on in the season because of how good he was from set pieces last season, his attacking output was incredible, and even games that Newcastle conceded in, he found ways to get bonus points. So a bit of a bonus points magnet. Let's not rule him out, but it will be hard to own, I think, for the start of the season. Kevin De Bruyne. Now, interestingly, this season, only 4 players into that premium, 10 million or more bracket. Of course, you can look at Trent Alexander-Arnold, and we'll talk about him in a second. And he came in at 8 million. But De Bruyne, one of the few different, premiums in that attack, really. So Haaland, Kane, Salah, De Bruyne. Not a lot of premiums kicking about, but still 10.5 million when you consider that De Bruyne had a lot of injuries last season, didn't get as many minutes as he's used to, and we thought he was the most nailed, City attacker outside of Haaland, but he didn't always play, had a few injuries, but he is currently flagged as well, and it's just when you think about the money you're spending with Erling Haaland, that's, it leaves very, 82 million left. I just think, 86 million, you're not gonna want that. When you think about Trent costing 8 million as well, you're gonna have about 76. It's ultimately, the maths of it does not look like De Bruyne is one to own alongside Haaland, but we might see different later on in the season. We look at one of the players who's been banned, and he's just not an option really, but Ivan Toney at 8 million. I mean, if he comes good later on in the season, fine, but he's not going to be playing till January, so due to his betting ban, I think ultimately, what does that mean for Bryan Mbeumo? Well, he's coming at 6.5. A nice price, I would say, but maybe we have to just wait and see with Brentford. I don't know, because a lot of people are jumping on the Mbeumo bandwagon, and I don't think it's as easy as Toney's out, so Mbeumo gets all of Toney's goals. It's going to take time to adjust. Now, of course, Mbeumo's played for Brentford without Toney in the team, and he's actually done well before, but there's a lot more pressure heaped on his shoulders this time around to be the main man for them, and whether or not they sign someone else in the striker department, that might mean the shackles are off for him a little bit and he's not as central, so therefore will he be as much of a talisman, hence will he be the one to get all the chances, all the goals. But the fact is he's been reclassified as a midfielder for 6.5, and that's why people are looking there. But let's wait and see if they sign a striker, wait and see if he actually will be on penalties. And let's just see, because Brentford's fixtures, they are quite good, but there's a lot of midfielders at good value, which we're going to talk about. So let's start talking about the position by position. Fernandes, as you can see there, 8.5. We'll start off with the goalkeepers then. And in terms of these goalkeepers, I think when they first came out, the first one we really saw was Leno and Pickford. And at 4.5 each, I think they represent decent value. Now, I'm not going to say that they're perfect, because there are a few goalkeepers that are tickling a few people's fancies that are not Leno and Pickford, but let's just discuss them firstly. I think ultimately when you look at the fixtures for both of them, they actually rotate really well. Now, the first kind of few game weeks of Pickford, really nice fixtures, and a lot of people have flocked to him. The last kind of few weeks, though, it started to decline a little bit now, and his high ownership, it was something like 25% now, down to 15, but still, he's still in a lot of Game Week 1 drafts, and, most people haven't opened up the game too much. The game launched on Wednesday the 5th of July, and it's the 21st, so there's about 3 weeks now to the season starts, but ultimately, right, the main thing here to say is, with Pickford, why are people bringing him in? Well, the fixtures look very nice. They don't face a top 6 team for the first 4 game weeks, and then you look at the run after that, you could even hold him for the Arsenal game. It's only one bad match, and then even after that, Luton, Bournemouth, and then maybe look to switch off him around Game Week 9, because Liverpool's a tricky one, away from home as well. But also you look at that, Brighton game, that won't be an easy one. So he was a goalkeeper that a lot of people had kind of bookmarked in as a nice player to hold up till that first wild card. We don't know when that will be that players choose to go for the wild card, but because of the fact there's no World Cup this year, there's no Game Week 17 unlimited transfers, you can hold your wild card a bit later. You look at the player that won FPL last season at FPL Guns, Ali, he wildcarded quite late, and maybe that's a strategy that has some merit to it. But ultimately, Pickford, you see why he's an option, because he gets the save points and he's playing for a team that does concede a lot of chances, and he didn't score loads of points last season, mainly because Everton struggled defensively. But with a whole pre-season for Sean Dyche, we look at Burnley in the Sean Dyche era, they were defensively quite hard to break down, and ultimately they did concede shots, and that's why Nick Pope was such a good FPL asset in his Burnley days, and so much better last season as well with Newcastle. So he does have defensive capabilities, Sean Dyche, as a coach. It's just whether or not Pickford, when you think about the fact that, next summer it will be the Euros for England, that's going to play on Pickford's mind. He's going to want to play himself into form. I think he's pretty certain to be the number one, but, you want to make sure he stays on top of that competition, with Pope having a good season last year, Champions League on the horizon for him. He's going to want to impress. So it's going to be interesting to see, really, with Pickford. But that's one of the options. I think that's a nice price for him. Leno as well. Now, with Leno, I think it's a bit more interesting because he had a bit more points last season. I talked about the save points with Pickford. That was definitely a factor with Leno last season. And I just think that this is a really nice price point. The problem for me is the fixtures. I'm not too keen when I look at comparison to Leno when I compare with Pickford. But that's why they could be good rotating options. But the way I like to play FPL is always, quite simple when it comes to goalkeepers. I don't like to spend a lot of budget with them. And I usually get one of the players and playing goalkeepers from one of the promoted sides. That's how I'd done it in the past. I got Backman a couple of seasons ago when Watford were in the Premier League. But ultimately, with Leno, he's a goalkeeper that's played a lot in the league. He's got that experience and he gets save points. So it's logical. But then you look at the fixtures. Arsenal in Game Week 3, not ideal. But then back-to-back, they've got Man City away. So you don't really want to be starting him as your main goalkeeper for 2 weeks in a row against those tricky opposition. But then the fixtures do kind of get quite nice either side of those two games. So he's one of those white players that might be one to hold, might be one to have as a rotation with Pickford. But a decent price all in all. I think when you look at the list of these goalkeepers, and we're kind of going to break some of them down, most of these aren't really much options. And we're going to talk about cheap players. Don't forget that after my few videos coming up, we've got the one with the rating my first draft, or showing my first draft, I should say, and then also rating your drafts. We will be looking at the cheap players in that defensive position, because we're going to look for the next Livramento, the next Lundstrom, the next Dallas, and see if we can find ourselves that cheap gem at 4.0, possibly 4.5 defender that gets up loads of attacking returns. So let's see if we can do that in a future video. But in terms of the cheap players for the goalkeeping department, I think there are a few options. We looked at last season. We had Ward and Iverson as that really nice 8 million combination, or it looked like that before the start of the season. Then Leicester got relegated, so hindsight's a wonderful thing. But he did have a couple good game weeks, Ward. It's just whether or not we want to go there. But you look at the situation at Wolves right now with Jose Sarr. Now, he hadn't the best of seasons last year, and there are talks of Wolves letting other clubs like Nottingham Forest, I think, was one of them. Possibly, I might have mistaken that for another team, but certainly a few clubs were looking at maybe Jose Sarr. So that does open the options really for the 4.0 goalkeepers. Maybe Sarkic from Wolves, maybe King. But the one I'm looking at is Bentley. I think he did play a few games at the end of last season, David Bentley for Wolves, and if he does become the number one, then we could be looking at another 4.0. It's just that the fixtures for Wolves are a bit hit and miss, and with how defensively they were last season, I might want to wait and see them be a bit more shored up, because they've lost a lot of players. They've lost Ruben Neves, and they're going to lose more because they've just got financial problems. So I think they're going to want to get the players off their books. But whether or not they do sign another goalkeeper, we will have to see. The 4.0 situation at Tottenham is quite simple. I just don't think you want to go there, because you'll be taking up a Tottenham spot with the goalkeeper. But with the 5.0 in there, Vicario. Now, Lloris looking like he's going to leave. They've brought in Vicario or Vicario. Let me know in the comments if that's the right pronunciation. But yeah, ultimately, this guy's new to the league, so we'll have to see how he gets on. I don't think you'll be looking, though, in that direction. Fotheringham at 4.5. I mean, I think that's ultimately expected price. Most of the promoted goalkeepers come in at that price. But he did do well in the last season. I played Gaffer.io, which is the championship fantasy, and he was probably my goalkeeper for most of the season. And he did get a lot of points, but I don't know if that will necessarily happen, because Sheffield United, they're going to have a big step up. They haven't made a lot of transfers, and I do worry for them in terms of this season, defensively, how will they adjust. But I think he's just a bit of what we'll wait and see as well. Now, Horvath is interesting. Now, I think Horvath, there was a certain Horvath at Luton last season. Whether or not this is the same one, he's at Nottingham Forest, it says, on the FPL game. So very interesting, that one. But I can't imagine that he will be starting for Forest. I would imagine it would be Hennessy, or probably actually if Dean Henderson makes the move permanently from Manchester United. Karius at 4.0, I mean, maybe Pope and Dubravka can find a way to get themselves injured, but even so, it's Karius. We're not going to look at him. So we're going to speed through some of these other goalkeepers. And as you can see here, at 5.0, in comes Andre Onana, the new signing for Manchester United. We discussed briefly earlier, but that's an interesting price at 5 million, because you look at the other Manchester United players, you've got Luke Shaw at 5.5. You've got a few of the other United defenders like Martinez, Varane, Dalot, all coming in at 5 million. And you're not quite confident of starts necessarily with some of those like Dalot, when he's got Wan-Bissaka competing with him. And ultimately, the others like Martinez not really having that attacking output that you want from an FPL asset. Whereas Luke Shaw has that. So ultimately, with Andre Onana, you're looking at a route into that defence that's nailed. You know he's going to play. He's been brought in as a successor for David De Gea. And you get the 0.5 saving for Luke Shaw. But the question will be, should we gamble on him? Because he is a new goalkeeper to the league. How will he do? If he plays out from the feet, could that be a problem? You know, you only looked at Alisson a few seasons ago when he did that at Liverpool, and we saw a few mistakes, you know, away to Leicester. And you see, you know, Iheanacho rob him of the ball and give it to Gazal, and he scored that embarrassing goal. And Alisson got slated for weeks. Well, he only took a few seasons, and he became the league's best goalie. So, could Onana do that? Will he have teething problems? We'll have to find out. But it'll be fascinating to see, because with him having those, you know, passing ranges, playing out with his feet, that will be really good for the bonus points. So, yeah, let's see how United do. But ultimately, fixtures for United are looking quite nice. Wolves, Forest, you got Burnley in there as well, Crystal Palace, Brentford. So, not a bad first, 7 or 8 there. So, interesting to see how that one will adapt. And then other prices to look at, really. Heaton was linked with Luton for a bit. And we've got no news on that, really. Luton had Matt Macy as well, and they thought they might get Begovic, the former Everton goalkeeper, but he's gone to QPR. So let's wait and see with that. If Heaton does go to Luton, we could see a starting 4.0 for that team. Also, one to note is that Macy, I don't know if you remember him, but he was at Arsenal a few seasons back, and I don't think he's going to start. So if those people are thinking, oh, we got a starting Luton goalkeeper, I just think it's unlikely, because I'm pretty certain that Shea will start the season goal for Luton. So that's an interesting one. And then moving on, we've got a few other things to cast your eyes over. Trafford has just moved into the game after he had his heroics for the under-21s in the England Euros. Now, ultimately, we are going to have to wait and see with that, because Burnley, coming into this league, they were defensively really solid under Sean Dyche for a few seasons, at least, before that relegation season. But now under Company, there's a whole new style of play there. He does play that possession football that we've seen at Manchester City, and he's obviously got from his manager Pep Guardiola. So there's a big kind of emphasis on that for Burnley. Will that mean that they concede more goals? Will that mean there's going to be less chances of teams sitting back like Burnley and getting shots away? If Burnley are always going to press, they're going to not have that many moments defensively soaking up pressure and conceding chances. So I think ultimately that will lessen the appeal of Trafford, but let's not forget the heroics of that penalty save for England. Interesting enough as well, we've got a few options at Brighton, but it's a bit of a headache, to be honest, because they've got Europa League football to contend with this season, and they've now signed a new goalkeeper, Verbruggen, and I think Verbruggen ultimately is going to be their future goalkeeper, a bit like Steele came in as the future of Brighton's goalkeeping after Sanchez was having a bit of a fallout. But ultimately, the way I look at it is that Steele is going to be number one, at least for the start of the season, but Verbruggen could come in at any point. So it's just a bit of a headache, really. They're all at 4.5, but I just don't think we're going to be owning them if we know that there's other goalkeepers that definitely will start. Talking of new goalkeepers, Flecken has come in for Brentford, and he's got a lot of praise, and I think there's a lot of sense going with him. We'll have to see ultimately, whether or not Raya does leave, because David Raya was the best scoring goalkeeper last season, and at 5 million, you're just not going to own David Raya when there's other players who have more certain fit futures at the clubs, and ultimately, he's just a bit too expensive if he's not going to be playing. So Flecken at 4.5 is interesting though. It's whether or not it's worth the gamble, a new player to the league, and ultimately, Brentford defensively were very good last season, but will Flecken do as well as Raya did, in terms of those save points? We just don't know how Flecken's going to adjust. He's going to be new to the league. He's, not been playing these games in the big time. He's not been, in under that much pressure really. So we'll have to see how he performs under pressure. But I see the logic in going for it because the fixtures are fairly good for Brentford for a long stretch really. You look at them and think Tottenham first up is not ideal, but let's see how that goes, and then after that really nice. So yeah, it's not too bad. I have to admit. Moving on from Flecken, and we've got an interesting situation in the next team that we're going to talk about, and that is, of course, it's going to be West Ham, because Areola, you can see just there, West Ham have had Fabianski as their number one for a long, long time, and you would imagine that Fabianski won't just be completely disregarded this season, but Areola has always been there, waiting in the wings, hoping to get that number one spot, and Fabianski's certainly getting on a bit. He's getting quite old now, and I think Areola's going to want that number one spot after he played mostly in the Europa Conference last season when they, of course, lifted that. So now they've got Europa League football to contend with. Will that mean that Fabianski plays those Europa League games? Well, he's an interesting price, Fabianski, at 4.5, but even more interesting is Areola at 4.0. Now, 4.0 is obviously a nice price, but we didn't expect that for Areola. We thought maybe Fabianski might come in at 5, maybe Areola at 4.5. So if Areola can get down a starting place, then there's a nice 4.0 option for us to feast on. So we'll have to see with that. A few people in the know, not that confident because he's not really been factoring for West Ham in pre-season, Areola, but also talks that he might have just been on holiday and that it wasn't time for him to come in yet. So it's just one to wait and see. But ultimately, let's not sweat over our 4.0 goalkeepers. Then we've got Hennessy, who, like I said, could start for Nottingham Forest. We'll have to wait and see if Henderson moves. And interestingly enough, 4.5 is also the price for Johnston. Now, Palace's fixtures, they've got Arsenal game week 2, so it's whether or not you think it's worth it there. But it's just about a bit of a headache. We talked about with Brighton, we don't know who's going to start. That was also kind of the case last season. And then Guaita got himself injured, right? So Johnston did end the season and he was pretty decent, to be fair to him. But do we know who's going to start for sure this season? We'll have to wait and see. But he was okay, I've got to be honest. And for 4.5, there's a lot worse options out there. Sheffield United first up is not too bad. So I don't mind the Johnston shout, that's for sure. Then we look at the other situation at Manchester United with Henderson. I talked about him for Forest. Now, if Henderson does stay fit, because he did get that injury, and hence the crazy signing of Keylor Navas came in for Nottingham Forest. But we've got to remember, Henderson in the past has been really good for save points, and if Forest keep conceding chances, then at 4.5, Henderson is one to possibly watch out for when Forest's fixtures turn, because to start the season, Forest, they've got a real awful run, and I just don't think it's worth our money really spending it when you think about there's other options in that Nottingham Forest team. Arsenal up first, okay, Sheffield United is alright, but then to have Man United, Chelsea and City in the next 4, no thanks, in my opinion. But moving on from those goalkeepers, we've got Forster at 4.0. I just don't think he's going to start for Spurs. They've brought in Vicario to be the number 1, but still, we'll have to see if he does still start as the number 1, because let's not forget, he did only come in the second half of the season, Jason Steele, and I think he was unlucky in terms of some of the points he got. He got a few own goals here and there, and did get an assist. So he's got that FPL points potential. But let's always remember that Verbruggen, he could come in at any point. Sanchez is just such a dead option because I think he's just fallen out with the manager. So he could well be on the move. So just don't even look at him. The same goes for Lloris. Neto is an interesting one. Again, comes in at 4.5 like last season. He did get a few save points here and there, but I'm not sure about Bournemouth's fixtures to start off with, and I just don't know if I would be going there. Arrizabalaga obviously was a bit of a cheat code at the end of last season, because after the World Cup he came in at a nice he was already a nice price at 4.5. And when Mendy got dropped, you thought, oh, that's just going to be the real template pick, and it really was for a lot of people. He did get save points, and he did do quite well, even though Chelsea weren't defensively always brilliant last season. But this season at 5 million, he's been priced up. I just don't think it's worth it with the money. You can look at other Chelsea attackers in that defence. When I say attackers, I mean they have the upside for the defence, because, you know, Reece James, Ben Chilwell, I know they hurt us in the past, but at least they've got that attacking upside, and they're quite nice for their price, for their position. But a 5.0 Chelsea goalkeeper, I just don't think is going to be worth it. We have to see how Pochettino gets them going. I mean, I talk about James and Chilwell. Let's not forget that Pochettino, in his time at Tottenham, of course, did have a bit of rotation with the fullbacks. So we would imagine that James plays, Chilwell plays if they're fit. But let's not forget that they've got some other players in that team that can play at fullback. Malo Gusto is one of them, who comes in at 4.0. So interesting. If James does get injured, let's see if Gusto has any moments in that defence. And also, let's not forget Ederson, right? I know a lot of people won't go there, but let's not forget that City are probably one of the best defenders in the league, and it's impossible right now to pick who is going to start in their defence, because Kyle Walker looked like he was going to leave to Saudi Arabia. He seems to be staying at the moment, but they've got Akanji, they've got Ake, and Ake did start most games here and there, but they've just signed now Gvardiol, who can play where Ake was playing last season on that left side. Whether or not it's the left centre-back or just a left-back that Gvardiol can play. But that's an interesting signing for FPL, because it just muddies the waters. John Stones in the defence was playing in that inverted position, a bit like Trent Alexander-Arnold and Alexander Zinchenko last season. But I'm just not sure at 5.5 it's worth John Stones when we don't know what his role will be in that midfield. Will that therefore mean he doesn't get as many kind of blocks and interceptions? Will he actually be, you know, just making those passes? And he doesn't score that many. He gets a few headers, but maybe there's more logic to, if Stones does get rotated, you know, Ederson, even though, okay, Ortega did come in for a few games, but Ederson's a bit more nailed in that City 5.5 defence slot. So although it's painful to own Ederson, and he always seems to concede that 81st minute goal to wipe out the clean sheet, and doesn't get loads of save points, and when he even does the long through balls, he somehow finds a way to get himself robbed of the assist. Even though these things happen and we say, Ederson, do not go there again, there's a chance that we could go there again if City have double game weeks. Let's never say never, but yeah, it'll be an interesting one to see at the start of the season, because City's fixtures are very, very good. Pickford, I talked about. Fabianski as well, I've mentioned really, but if he is the number one, let's not dismiss Fabianski, because West Ham defensively are going to have to really go for it. And if Areola does start in the Europa League like he did last season for the Europa Conference, then maybe Fabianski could be a decent option. I just don't know how certain that is. With Fabianski getting older, I would imagine he does play less minutes, but we'll have to see with Areola's situation. Martinez comes in at 5. Now, that's quite a nice price, to be honest. You know, I think he was around that price in his first few seasons at Villa when he came in as that really good option. And ultimately, let's not forget how brilliant it was in that first season. He might have been 4.5, to be honest. We can look back here. And that's why the FPL site is brilliant, because you can look back at previous seasons and see what their starting price was, but also you can see what their current price was. So yeah, that 20 to 21 season, he was 4.5, as we can see right here. So ultimately, obviously, he's not as good of an option now, because we look at other players around that 4.5, 5.0, and he's not had an amazing season last year. I mean, look, 135 points is not to be sniffed at, but it's not nowhere near the levels he was in that first Villa season. And, you know, ultimately, the fixtures for Villa, not too bad, but not ideal either. Liverpool, Newcastle to start as well. I just don't think there's much hype around Martinez, but look, it could get on later on in the season. Leno, as I've mentioned, is a good price at 4.5. Now, Ramsdale's an interesting one. A lot of people, along with Pickford, flocked to Ramsdale when they saw that price of 5.0, because it's not bad. You know, same price as Onana, and Arsenal were defensively pretty good last season. Now, we did have a stage towards the end where they tailed off, of course, and they didn't seem to keep a lot of clean sheets at home. But maybe that's going to be put to bed with, another season fresh for Arsenal. They've got a lot of new players, Timber being one of them. That will shore up their defence. So maybe Ramsdale will become an option again, because in that 21-22 season, he was one of the best goalkeepers. He got saves, made save points, and ultimately was a decent option. So with Ramsdale, yeah, I do really like him as a pick. It's just there's a bit of a hesitancy on my side, because although he's 5.0 and it's affordable, you look at the other Arsenal players you could have, Gabriel for the same price, or you could even go Timber for the same price, Zinchenko for the same price, and I don't think Ben White is an option at 5.5, but Ramsdale is interesting. It's just whether or not you prioritise another attacking trio or another trio from Arsenal, because remember, for each team we can only have 3 assets. And Ramsdale, yes, he had a good season a couple of years ago, but he doesn't typically pick up those FPL points. If he does get 6 points, it's nice, of course, but you kind of want those save points or those bonus points for passing out. And Ramsdale did try it last season, but I just don't know if he's going to keep doing it, or if is he going to be, solid in terms of those save points or getting those points that sometimes he just doesn't get. So I'm not too sure about Ramsdale, but we'll have to see on him. I talked about Jose Sarr and the possible situation with him leaving. We don't know whether he's gonna leave Wolves. I think if he does, it'll be a real shame. But we'll have to see. Like, the way I look at it is with Jose Sarr. If the other lads become the goalkeepers, then he's just a non-option. And at 5.0, I still think he's pretty much a non-option. Pretty much. Like, he's not completely out of the question, because they might get a stage later on in the season where he becomes better and he becomes more attractive. But right as of now, with what we know with some of these goalkeepers, I just think it's a tricky one, because Bentley could play, and that does make him just a waste of money, really. So Jose Sarr, I'm not feeling at the moment, and I would pass on that personally. But it's just one of those ones. There's no right answer particularly, but also it could be a really good option if we come to it. And then finally, we're going to round things off with the goalkeepers with Raya and Alisson. And I don't think Pope is necessarily essential, but he's also not the worst option. It's just that Newcastle's fixtures are not great, but 5.5 for me personally is too much to spend on a goalkeeper. He was a bit cheaper last year, so I'm not really feeling that. But then we talk about Alisson and Raya. Now, Raya I just don't think is an option, because chances are he has said he wants to move on from Brentford. But if he does stay, of course, that will hinder the appeal of getting in Flecken. So it's a tricky one. I don't know if he can replicate necessarily the season of last year. But ultimately, what I'm saying here is I don't think he's going to be in your FPL teams. Alisson as well. For me, again, 5.5. I think it's too much of a price to consider him. But, if Liverpool defensively turn their seasons around, then you never know. There could be a point where we own him, a bit like Ederson, where if they have a few double game weeks. And Alisson is probably the best footballing goalkeeper, but I don't know if he's really the best FPL asset. So that's my thoughts on that. Those are the goalkeepers, and we're going to whiz through the other positions, because for some reason I cannot seem, people, I'm really sorry about this, but my charger seems to be playing up a little bit, and I'm not quite sure why that is. So we'll just have to see with that if we can quickly resolve that issue. So sorry about this. It's the first time I've done something like this, and it's just affecting the way it's charging. But maybe I can sort it if we try again. But let's get into the defenders whilst we've still got the battery. So yeah, defence now. This is where we're going to look. I think defence is quite easy. And I say that, it's not necessarily all the time, because, things change. Trippier could be a really good asset. He could surprise us. He could be, good despite the fixtures that Newcastle have. But despite all of this, I just think, why go for Trippier at 6.5 when you can have Gabriel at 5? Gabriel, it bamboozles me to see Gabriel at 5 million. You've got to factor in the fact that Gabriel, sorry about this, people, we'll just need to make sure that this doesn't run out. Gabriel, what we've got to remember, was actually the highest scoring point scorer, the fourth highest, and he's at 5.0. I mean, it's pretty bonkers, really. So, for me, I just think with Arsenal's defence last season and how solid it was for a lot of the campaign, don't overthink this one. And Gabriel has got a lot of attacking threat, so that's much more tempting in my opinion. White, I think, also been priced too highly because, okay, yeah, he got a few attacking returns last season, but the fact that White's more expensive than Gabriel, I think that's a mistake from FPL, I'll be honest. Trent at 8 million, though, that is a big talking point, of course. And I think it's, for me, just motivated me even more to try and fit him in. But I see the logic with going without Trent because it can do so much for your draft. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about Salah. It's really hard to make a good team with Trent, Salah and Haaland in it because of the prices. So, if you're willing to go with two of those three, then you have to pick between Trent and Salah. Now, Trent in that inverted midfield position is really nice, and that's why I'm probably quite high on him. But let's see how Liverpool adapt. They've got new players coming in. You know, you've got Szoboszlai, you've got McAllister, and they're going to have to see and fit into that midfield role. So will that mean that Trent defensively is less of a good option and they'll keep less clean sheets if he's playing that midfield position? I don't know. They're going to have Konate back, starting fresh again. He had a decent campaign. But let's factor in the fact that there's a 3 million difference between those two at 5.0. So if Trent is not justifying his price with those attacking returns and he's not showing that, then a 3 million saving for Konate is going to be huge. So I think Trent is going to split the crowd, but I just really like him, especially in this new midfield role he's got for Liverpool, the inverted midfield role. It just means he's so attacking. But will Szoboszlai take some set pieces off of him? We'll have to see. McAllister, I talked about Salah earlier. Will he take penalties? Well, he's probably got a better penalty taking record than Salah, but I still don't think that means that Salah takes them, you know, and doesn't have them anymore, because Salah is just so selfish, and that's not how Salah works. So Trent is a bit of an interesting sticking point. Me at 5, I just don't think he's worth it now. He's just too pricey in my opinion now, and I'd rather Rico Henry at 4.5 when you get a bit more of attacking threat as well with assist potential. Now, me did get a few goals last season, to be fair, but I just don't feel the buzz for me. The B, of course. Fabian Schär, good season for last season. A 5.0 is okay, to be honest, and he could be one that we go to, but I just think Botman at 4.5 is outrageous. Now, of course, Botman didn't have a lot of attacking threat, but you've got to factor in he was in a team that was one of the best defenders in the league, and not just that, he scored 129 points last season, right? So we're talking about the top 10 point scorers in defence the whole season, and this guy's coming in at 4.5, the same price, can I remind you, as another Newcastle player who's been frozen out, Matt Targett. It's just bonkers. So look, he's great value, of course, but the fact that everyone auto-picked him in their Game Week 1 teams puzzled me, because their fixtures are quite dodgy. So for me, that's a player you could lose value on when everyone realises Newcastle can't necessarily keep clean sheets in the tougher fixtures, and then it'd be better to just not have him and then buy him when he's cheaper at, say, 4.3, 4.2, because people have sold him. So let's not forget that. And, you know, if you've owned him and Botman and he's dropped in price, then it's going to be a bit of a blow. And let's just imagine people start flocking onto him and he goes up in price, you might get priced out. Because let's not forget, the selling price is only half of the price difference. So let's say Haaland is at 11 million at the start of the season, which he wouldn't be, but let's say he was. And then you buy him when he is, you know, I don't know, 12 million. So that's a 1 million rise. And then you sell the guy, well, you're going to be selling him for 11.5, because that's half of the rise that he's got. And that same thing goes for Botman. So if you don't have to get him now and then lose value on him, and then you want to get him back later when everyone's buying him, you could get priced out. Burn, the same price at 4.5. I just don't think we'll look there, to be honest, because although he scored quite highly, he's just not got the same, sure for minutes as Botman does. You know, Burn will play most weeks, but what if they buy another fullback? I don't think they're going to take Botman out of that team, because he was just so integral to that team last season. Estupiñán at 5 for me is a pretty crazy thing. And look, ultimately, It does say battery charger is not charging, so that is a bit of an issue, people. We'll have to sort that. But yeah, Estupinian is just a fantastic option because he's so attacking, and he did get a goal at the Emirates, which we did bench. But look, he was my player for so long in so many game weeks that I started him, and he did so well. And I thought he was coming in at 5.5. I'll be honest. So at 5.0, he's a bit of a steal for me. Not pardoning the Brighton pun. But Brighton's fixtures are so good to start with. He just looked very, very hard to not own, and that's why he's reflected by that very nice, big, effective ownership, or team selected by at 51.4. And then Virgil, I'm not going to be owning Virgil at 6. I mean, he had his probably worst season for Liverpool last year. I just don't understand it. And also, I don't understand why they've, in the game, called him Virgil now, not Van Dijk. I mean, it's just crazy. No one calls him by Virgil, apart from Liverpool players or Liverpool fans or, their family. Like, who calls it Virgil as an FPL asset? It's just crazy. But FPL can do what they like. Now, Luke Shaw. This is an interesting one. We talked about Onana earlier at 5.0. At 5.5, Shaw is quite an interesting one because let's not forget how good he was last season. However, his attacking threat did lessen a little bit towards the end where they had a few injuries and therefore Shaw had to slot in at left centre-back. So that obviously lessened his appeal. But now that they'll have some players back from injury, he can probably slot back into that left-back spot. But maybe Ten Hag just thinks, Shaw did quite a good job at left centre-back. Maybe that's a position that he plays in more often. So it's an interesting one, that. But he's still a nice price at 5.5 and he's probably just a safe bet. He's going to play, unlike maybe other players like Chilwell or James if they have a knock or anything, or other players that aren't as nailed. And also, that he's got good chances of getting bonus points because that's what he did a lot last season. So I don't mind Luke Shaw as a decent option. Robertson at 6.5 for me, even though there's a big gap now between Trent and Robbo, I'm just not even questioning it. Like, I'm still going to be owning Trent. I'm going to be owning him. If I have to pay at 1.5 extra, then so be it. Because the way that Liverpool set up now, the difference between them in terms of their attacking output, I mean, maybe it's just a short thing and Robertson might go back to the same attacking threat he was previous campaigns, but I don't see it. The way that Liverpool set up now, they have to have someone who's holding back defensively, and Robertson just wasn't in that attacking system that we like to see him usually, where they push up the wing backs. And Liverpool playing that wing back role, they've been so good for FPL points in the past. But with Trent in that inverted midfield position, it means Robertson has to kind of stay back to make sure that they don't get left behind as centre backs. So it's just not as attractive, Robertson, anymore, which is a real shame. But if he starts showing more signs of attacking, then at 6.5, he's a nice, decent option, but it's whether or not you'd go for him over a Trippier. Then Saliba, 5.0. Now, let's not forget, this guy, first proper FPL season where he played throughout the whole of it, and it was a pretty special one. Did, unfortunately, though, get hindered by injury, but he's going to be back. You imagine he's going to be quite nailed, because Arsenal was so desperate to have him back after he went out injured. That really did impact their title charge. And, he popped up with a couple goals. I'm not sure the goal threat is as much as people sometimes make out. He did score a few low XG chances with that goal up at Bournemouth. The header against Brentford, but that was about it, really, for goal threat. So I'm not sure that's what you're getting him for. I think it's just the assurance of starts. But possibly at the same price, Gabriel with the added goal threat, I'm not sure with Saliba. I talked about Henry. He's a good option at 4.5. Probably, in my opinion, the best 4.5 defender based on attacking threat and the fact that Brentford was just generally a good defence last season. I guess we'll have to see if that changes with the addition of Flecken and whether or not Raya actually leaves. Pinnock as well, good value. Did pop up with a few goals last season, so he will be interesting at 4.5. I'd rather him than me, for sure. Save that 0.5 for the centre-back. Then Dunk, I just don't think he's as good as an FPL asset as he once was when he's the same price as Estupinian. And yes, maybe if Brighton do rest a few players for Europa League and Estupinian gets rotated, Dunk could be that minutes man. But at the same time, the way I look at it is, Dunk just doesn't have the same attacking output that Estupinian can do. Doesn't get forward as much, and ultimately just not as solid as an FPL asset as he once was. Konza at 4.5 now could be interesting. Villa have signed Pau Torres, so that could push Mings out of the 11 and possibly makes cash a bit of an issue because Konza can play at right back. So if Konza's up at right back, maybe he means it gets forward a bit more. Maybe we could think about Villa defenders later on, but for now, I'm just not too sure about that. And then we've got some of the other players, Tarkowski at 4-5. Now, we've talked about Everton's good fixtures with Pickford. Doesn't necessarily rule out Tarkowski. Now, he did have a painful one game week in my team last season with that game week 25 double game week, and he got 0 points across 2 games. Yes, believe it or not. But he is still, let's not deny, a bit of a goal threat with the way that Everton set up with the set pieces. So if fixtures allow it, and they do at the start of the season, then maybe he's one to look at 4.5. Dalot at 5.0, I'm just not sure if he's nailed on at that position and that price, so I'm just not too keen on it. But did show some attacking threat last season, did get his first Premier League goal for them, so maybe he'll be more of a factor if Wan-Bissaka doesn't quite show the form. Zinchenko as well. We talked about with the inverted role for Stones and Trent, making them a bit interesting to own. For Zinchenko, for me, I worry about Zinchenko because they've still got Tierney there, but also they've just now signed Timber. Now, I think Zinchenko will play minutes, but whether or not Zinchenko is also going to be inverted, I'm not too sure. Now, with Timber coming in, maybe he could be that inverted midfielder, and he can play that role because Timber's quite flexible. He can play at centre-back and right-back, which obviously does put doubts in the mind of players like Ben White, who could play at right back last season. Maybe Gabriel, but I just don't see Gabriel getting dropped, to be honest. So I think Zinchenko likely on the left most of the time. But if it means that they play a back four of Timber, in that midfield role, playing that inverted role, then maybe Zinchenko doesn't start. Maybe you could have a back four of Gabriel, Ben White, Saliba, and Timber, or we could see Zinchenko start. It's a bit of an up in the air one, but if he is going to play minutes, then that could be a tempting one, because we know that he's one that does get his knack on set pieces, and he has a knack. What I mean is he has a knack on he gets his noggin on it on set pieces, like he did in that first goal of last season away to Palace. I appreciate we've been going for a while, so I'll just try and speed through these, pick out any irrelevant ones really, and move on from them. Mitchell at 4.5 is interesting. I talked about the 4.5 options. I mean, he's got a bit of attacking threat, I guess. Palace fixtures, they're okay, I guess, not brilliant. Then we talk about the City defence, and this is where I just think it's too muddy. Stones at 5.5, it's a bit much to pay, maybe, when you haven't got as much attacking threat as some of the other 5.5s like James, Chilwell, Shaw. I say Shaw because he can get forward, whereas Stones, he doesn't get, he does get forward with the inverted midfield role, but not as much as Shaw can do. If Shaw's playing left back, sometimes he takes corners as well. Stones is not as much of that, but he can get his head on set pieces. So Stones is one to watch, but I'm not sure about him. Ake, maybe at 5.0, he could represent good value, but we just don't know if he's going to necessarily be as nailed as he was last season. And then we talk about Ashley Young. We're going to talk about Ashley Young briefly, just because if Everton do get better, and I know Ashley Young is far from that, ironically, he is getting on now, but he signed a deal with Everton, much to a lot of people's surprise. He actually is a bit of an FPL stat here. The only player to have played in defence, forward, and attack in terms of classification in the FPL game in its history. It's, at least the only player I can remember. It's crazy to think that, because there was a season at United he was classified as a forward, and then of course he was at Watford for a few years. I don't know if he was classified in anything other than a defender back then, but he might have been a midfielder at times. But he was a midfielder as well for Manchester United in the game, and then of course for Villa last season was priced as a defender, so, and stays that way for Everton. But yeah, really, if he does play, which I doubt, to be honest, I think he's going to be like a backup option, so probably won't play as many minutes. But let's just say an injury happens and he's suddenly now first choice, then he did show a couple goals. He got one goal, I think, last season. He did show one assist or two or something. So ultimately, it's not one to look at right now. But if we know he's starting, 4.5, nice option for that price is all I'll say. But not really much of an option outside of that. Emerson Royale. Now, Emerson had a bit better of a season than previously, I think. His attacking threat was a bit more than usual, but Tottenham defensively are a bit suspect, and at Pedro Porro, 5.0 could be a bit more attractive. It's just with Posta and I should get this pronunciation right. I know how it is, but I just stumbled there. No, is it Poste? Not Ange. Ange Postecoglou. There you go. I knew it, but I just got the surname and first name mixed up. With Postecoglou, the way he played at Celtic, it's very much looking at that, the three and the fullbacks pushing on. So I think if they do play that 4-3-3, which a lot of people think, that will reduce the impact and the appeal of Porro. But if they do go to that wing-back system, and, that means that Porro has got the license to go forward, or even Porro, if he plays in that, inverted fullback role, if they play a 4-3-3, and he takes up one of those midfield spots, a bit like Liverpool did last season, or City did as well with Stones, then maybe that could be brilliant for Porro. But in terms of Royale, I'm just not confident really of his consistent attacking threat. And Spurs defensively as well, you've got to remember they've been pretty suspect for a while. So the clean sheets maybe a bit less likely. Akanji, again, it's just a headache with Ake. I just don't know who's going to start. He was good last season, to be honest, Ake Akanji. When he came in for his first season, he really impressed. But from FPL, I'm just not sure you'd go there. Then one more ones to reel off, really, and then we'll get onto the midfielders. Interesting one here with the Wolves defence that they've mentioned, because I think Semedo will start most weeks, but we've seen Matt Doherty return to Wolves at 4.5. If he does nail down some sort of minutes due to an injury or something like that, maybe if Doherty can get back into the swing of things with his form, we know how good he was back in his early days at Wolves. Obviously, less of a player doing that for Tottenham. Can he get back to that? If he can, 4.5 could be nice if Wolves' fixtures went on a nice run. So, interesting one to shout out there. Cancelo's still in the game. It's crazy to think. I don't think he will be, though, so don't worry about him. He's likely to leave Man City. Walker at 5, just like he was at start of last season. I actually owned him in Game Week 1. And he did got me a few, clean sheets, but that was all he does, really. No attacking returns from this guy. And then Wan-Bissaka at 4.5. I just don't know if he's going to be nailed on, really, for Manchester United. We'll have to wait and see. But we get to the 4.0s now, and this is where we get interesting. Because with the 4.0s, there are a few players here where I'm going to be talking about them in an upcoming video. So just hold fire on that for my looking for the next Lundstrom/Dallas/Livramento. But last season was slim pickings, it has to be said. Estupiñán maybe was the one. Nico Williams was okay, I guess. Pretty bad, but Estupiñán especially, in terms of 4.5, 4.0 cheap players. When you look at the 4.5, 4.0 cheap players this season, it's less options, I think. I think players like Cash, players like Mings and Pau Torres, they're not going to be necessarily always playing, necessarily always attacking. Pau Torres is just not known for that at his days at Villarreal. And when I look even further down to the 4.0s, this is where it starts getting to the point where, okay, yes, Doughty for Luton's got some attacking threat. So is Connor Roberts. But I'm not really loving going in on one of those teams. But what I do have some interest in is the 4.0s, because obviously they save you a bit more money than usual. Now, with these 4.0s, I have to say, we do not know much right now. And ultimately, that's where we've got to be very, very careful about this. We can't assume things will fall into place, but a few players are interesting right now. So when I talk about the 4.0s, I will cover this in more detail, but people have talked about Bayer at 4.0. He was a player they signed on loan, I think, in January, and then he's got a permanent move now. He is probably going to start. So this is quite a nice thing to have, a starting 4.0 defender. Admittedly, it's from Burnley, so we don't know how they'll adjust to the Premier League, but could be an interesting one. Lamptey at 4.0 as well. We know, obviously, he's had his injury problems, and Estupiñán is pretty nailed in that left-back spot. But if the right-back situation changes and Veltman gets an injury, or, for instance, Gross doesn't choose to fill in at right-back, and obviously if Caicedo leaves, then he'll have a bit less chance of playing deeper and Gross playing there and that sort of thing. So it will be a bit of an issue for that respect. But if Lamptey does start games, does get a bit more fitness and a bit more minutes in the legs, then 4.0, very decent. And the same goes for Van Heck. Van Heck, we've seen a bit of him in training, but I just don't know if he's going to start. Probably not. So yeah, Bayer is an interesting one for sure. Charlie Taylor, I'm afraid, is just not going to looking like he's going to start. Those days are over, I'm afraid. Gusto I talked about, could be interesting if James gets injured. And then the other couple of really main ones to mention is Bell at Luton, who did score on international duty for Jamaica at the Gold Cup. And he's got some goals in him, maybe. He did score one last season, but he is mainly a centre-back, so we've got to factor that in. Not necessarily going to be delivering all the time the goals, but one to watch, especially with Luton's kind run of fixtures to start the season. And then finally, we're going to talk about... Oh, sorry. Ignore that. Did not mean to do that. Just sorry about that, people. The final one to really talk about is the 4.0 in Spence and in Baldock. Because if Spence gets a move, we know how good he was for Nottingham Forest in the Championship. He could be dynamite. But more importantly, Baldock. Remember how good he was in that first season with Sheffield United when Lundstram was coming through. Baldock got a few assists. He was pretty good. Now, we don't know if he's 100% going to play because Bogle has played minutes there. But I think it was something like 33 of 38 games in the Championship last season when Baldock was fit. Baldock's played. So I think he does start most games here and there. So it will be an interesting one to see if he does start the season. But nice fixtures, I guess, for Sheffield United. Might be a nice option. So those are the prices for defenders. And then for the midfielders and forwards, we're going to whiz through it because we've already talked about the majority of them. Now, the one that interests me is Son at 9 million because he did finish Golden Boot winner 2 seasons ago. We've got to remember that. So, really interesting. Can he have a good season? Probably. It's just, how does Postecoglou get them going? If Kane leaves, that will take away the appeal of Son because obviously we know that they love assisting each other. The interesting thing about Jota, moved to midfield at 8.0, the same price as Martinelli, but will we know that Jota starts? It feels like it's even less certain than Martinelli's minutes are. So Havertz the same, 7.5, a bit cheaper. We know he's going to start, but it's a bit of uncertainty, a bit like with Jota in terms of where does he play in that team. Does Havertz play a bit more further forward, which means that Rice can go back, Timber can play in that inverted, and that lessens the appeal of Ødegaard, or does Havertz play in that kind of more deeper role, taking up that position that Xhaka did last season? We'll have to see. But Havertz did score recently in a pre-season game, even if there was that highlight that someone shown of basically took the penalties or took the shots at the goalkeeper and kept missing them or something like that. But not sure that should really play into our thoughts. Luis Diaz, 7.5. Nice price for him, I think. He's going to be a tempting one if he can just get a few minutes in him because he obviously did have a lot of injuries last season. But let's not forget he was one of their best players really at the start of last season. Then we got Foden and Grealish. Now this is tempting. Mahrez has left the game. Well, he should do at least soon because he's going to join a Saudi Arabian club. But Foden and Grealish both at 7.5 when City's fixtures are so good is tempting for sure. Grealish had a bit better of a season than previous in his time at City, but still generally he's just not as good as an FPL asset than he was in his peak days at Aston Villa. It's a sad situation. But Foden at the same price, if he starts games, he could be dynamite, but it's a big if. Maddison at 7.5 could be a really exciting new signing for Spurs. I think it's the player they've needed, that kind of number 10 player, sitting there behind Kane and really be that creator that Eriksen has been in previous Tottenham years. So 7.5, nice price. Trossard 7.0, just don't know if he's going to start games. Possibly not, so I wouldn't go there in my opinion. Sterling at 7 could be a nice one though. We talked about Son being cheap. Sterling also very cheap. And, could Son be the Rashford of last season, priced 3 million drop? And we could see, the same thing for Son in terms of that 3 million drop and a good season the next season. But with Sterling, he's had a few seasons where I've not been that convinced by him. Last season was one of those with his first season at Chelsea. But 7.0, if Chelsea do get back their mojo under Pochettino and Sterling really gets back his goal-scoring form, then he could be really the value of the season. At 7.0, he's a nice price. Then we've got Szoboszlai and Mount. Again, we don't know how they're going to factor into their teams. Does that mean that Fernandes pushes further forward with Mount defensively working? Or will it be an inverse situation where they both got 2 number 8s? We just don't know at Manchester United. And then Sancho as well. I just don't think he did have a good enough season for us to consider him. The same goes for Kulusevski, really. Only really on that first game week, which I did hoover the points up for, admittedly, home to Southampton. But yeah, Kulusevski needs to start producing more from a defensive point of view. I mean, he's quite creative, but Richarlison at a mid position, is interesting because if Kane does leave, that could be a steal at 7.0 because you've got potentially a out of position player there, and he's less than 7.5. So Richarlison could be very interesting. Bowen as well. I've seen a lot of people talk about Bowen. 5.8%. Has had a good pre-season with West Ham in the couple of games I've seen in Perth Glory. I think he also scored in another game as well, and it got a couple of assists against Tottenham. So yeah, Bowen could be a decent option. The fixtures aren't brilliant though, to be honest, to start the season, but maybe Bowen could be fixture-proof. We don't know. But we'll have to wait and see on that. Obviously scored the goal in the conference final, so that could give him the confidence to have a good season. And Werner, I've talked about him. I'm just a bit sceptical, but we'll have to wait and see. Gross, will Milner take penalties off Gross with Brighton? I don't know, but Gross has taken them before, so you've got to factor in he was the top point scorer in the midfield for Brighton, but I just still don't feel Gross is attacking enough in that team for me to consider him. March as well at the same price. I mean, March had a great season, let's not deny it, but I think a lot of people will flock towards Mitoma just because he feels as their talisman. And March did get, limited minutes at points in the season, got subbed off early, and also, just not quite as much attacking threat, in my opinion, as Mitoma. But at 6.5, I think Mitoma's underpriced. I thought he was going to come in at 7, so he's going to be a very good option for a lot of teams. Let's see if Mudryk has a good season. I mean, we've talked about Chelsea with Chilwell and James. I think ultimately, let's wait and see with their attackers because there's a lot of sorting out to do with the squad. They've sold a lot of their players, but Mudryk at 6.5 could become good value later in the season. And then we're just going to finish off with these last few forwards here. Enciso at 5.5, I'm not sure. Forwards, though, Haaland and Kane. Now, 14 and 12.5 respectively. It's interesting, but I just think Haaland's the one to go for. Jesus at 8, very good value. I think we talked about Jesus last season at 8 million with a nice price. That's also a nice one. And then Watkins and Wilson at 8. I just don't think we're going to own them because of the fixtures. But Nkunku comes in at 7.5, a very tempting option. Darwin at 7.5. Again, if he gets his form back on track, he's missed a lot of chances last season. And I think Wissa and Ferguson at 6.0 shouldn't be sniffed at. These players, they're decent value. It's just whether or not they get the minutes with other players attacking there. And Calvert-Lewin's a bit of an injury waiting to happen. But if he gets fit, let's see. I just don't think the likes of Nketiah, Joao Pedro, certainly from the start, he could be a decent option later on. But we don't know about their minutes. And the same goes for Weghorst and Rodriguez, who did play for Burnley last season. But I think he's getting on. So Burnley could well sign another striker. Budget options, Edouard 5.5, not bad. Morris at 5.5 is definitely going to play for Luton. And the same goes for Njai, who had a great season, Iliman Njai, last year. And I think that there could be a real good player there. So yeah, that wraps up my price reactions for the 2023-24 season. But to end the video, let me remind you of the league code, because as I mentioned, the game has launched and we can start tinkering with our teams. And I'll see you in the next one, which will be, of course, a first draft reveal for my team. But to join my league, it's very simple. Join with the following code. The code is, drum roll please, L133SG. Join me in the FPL Yellow Army's Loyal Legion Mini League. And the prizes, once again, we'll be doing Manager of the Month posts and the winner of the mini league, just as Thomas from FPL Apprentices did last season, will get to feature on my end of season FPL review. And the winner of that cup will also get a shout out. So do join the league with the code I mentioned. And I hope you have enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.